All right, class, welcome to a new day in English. We will be covering a new thematic unit, as you can see with no bell work today. And the unit we'll be covering is community, specifically communities in literature. Now, whilst we go through this, I ask you to think, am I a part of a community? Can I be a part of multiple communities? And what is my role in part of that? I want you to review yourself, people you may know, the characters we'll be reading about. Now, before we can get completely into the discussion of communities, we need to discuss the connections to the previous units discussed, and those of which will be classroom etiquette and literary devices. Does anyone remember, with show of hands, either of these ideas? Classroom etiquette and now literary devices. Thank you. Now, some points I would like to cover is that proper classroom etiquette is allowing myself or your classmates like full control of the floor. That means please remain seated, please no speaking, not even amongst a small group. Just remain quiet and seated for the remainder of their information. But if there is a question either before or after, please raise your hand and you may be called upon to ask a question or add information, add additional information. Now, for literary devices, I wish to touch upon the setting. And now setting is the when and where of a story. Where a story happens and when it takes place is very important to when it could be occurring, like if it's in the future or in the past, what values do we hold it to? Or is it about ourselves? Now, characterization is another literary device in which it's a process used to describe characters. Now, when you describe somebody, most people think of a list, right? They look like this, they are this tall. It's kind of like a doctor's office checklist, but writers can't give you that before, as it's not interesting. Instead, they must use it through like their actions, their thoughts, the things they say. Maybe it's another character speaking about them or the way they think of another character. There's many different ways to expertly weave this into writing. And I ask that you look for them and recognize them and point them out. The next would be a conflict. Now, there are two main types of conflict, internal and external. An internal conflict happens within, either with emotions or morals, or perhaps it's you're the old way of thinking versus the new way of thinking. Now, an external conflict is many different forms it can take. It could either be yourself against another person, a larger force, an idea. Now we can get on to the community. Are you a part of a community? By raise of hands, who is a part of a community? Thank you. Now, what is your role in a community? What community are you a part of? And is it possible for you to take part in multiple communities? Now I'll further with answering that, but the reading list we'll be covering in this 2-week thematic unit will be Mending Wall by Robert Frost, which will be read today, 70,000 Assyrians by William Sarian, which will be read today and tonight, Lakas at the Makibaka Hotel by Anthony D. Robles, which will be read tomorrow, and over the course we will read either or The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas or Roller Girl by Victoria Jamieson. Now we'll start with our first assignment of today. I wish for you to draw your community, and on top of the poster board, which we will hand out shortly, write what your community is and how they are all connected. What makes them a community? Now, while you write or draw, I ask you to think about what communities you're a part of, right? This doesn't just have to be the same community. It doesn't have to be the school community. It could be your family or any other community that you feel you're a part of. Now, think about, while you're doing this, your role in your community. Like, for example, if it's in the classroom, you're a student. You learn. That's your role. You are to learn in the classroom. Now, what does the community stand for? And the best way to actually understand this is to ask, what holds the community together? Now, for us, it's the dynamic to learn. We foster growth in knowledge, right? So we stand for learning, right? We wish to all learn, and I, as the advocator for that, will push us through whilst we will learn, right? Any further questions before we move on? Now, the first bit of reading we will do is The Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Who has heard of Robert Frost while I open this up? We are. Go. Now for The Mending Wall. I will read this aloud. Oh, screen sharing. Let's pause, resume share. Thank you. Now, Robert Frost has written many things. Some may heard Two Roads Diverged on a Yellow Path. But this is one that about community that I ask you to look for. What is the community in this work while we read it aloud? Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, that spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they would have left not one stone on a stone. They would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them here. I let my neighbor beyond the hill know, and on a day we will meet and walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go. To each the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are loaves and some so nearly balls. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. There is what we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across. And he eats the cones under his pines. I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me. I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it? Where are their cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or out, and to whom I would like to give offense. Something there is that does not love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly. I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savaged arm. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not only woods only and the shades of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Now to return back to the PowerPoint, we will start this new share. As we can see, thank you. We have some questions for us remaining on the mending wall. What exactly happened? Right. What happened in the mending wall was two people mending a wall. Mending means to put back together, to repair from what is there. Now, when repairing the wall, Robert Frost asks questions that he says to the neighbor, and then out loud to almost himself. He asks, because the neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors. He asks why. He can see if there are cows or if there was something they're walling in or out, but they have trees. They're both trees. The trees will not move, he says. My apple trees will never walk over to the pine trees, why do we need a wall? Now, why do we believe they needed a wall? I believe that it's mostly the neighbor wanting the wall and Robert Frost calling into question, and it's to keep the hunters out as well. Is that what he's walling in or out? He says the hunters knock it over. Could they not build a stronger wall? Or is there something that they enjoy in mending the wall together? Does that bring them closer as characters? Or does it keep them apart? Which does it truly do? Traditionally, a wall would keep them apart. Now think about the characters and what they were like. Think about the characterization about them, if you will. And now, is there any community in the mending wall? By show of hands, any answers to the question? What is the community in mending wall? Now, any further questions before we move on to the next assignment? No? Okay, so the next assignment will be on the bottom of your poster board, which we have drawn the community that we had and what made them community on top. On the bottom, write a definition for community. Note that it is of community, not this specific community or that specific community, but of communities in general. What is a community? You have a few minutes. Please take your time. Now, on to the next reading. Whilst we do that, I will pull this up in advance. Here we have 70,000 Assyrians. Now, this is also one of the parts where I may break the fourth wall, if you will, and say that I would much rather have the class read this together, as it has a very new form of community that I wish for them to break through with themselves, as the characters disagree on believing what part of community they're in, while Seyaran believes he's a part of the Armenian community with the Assyrians. The Theodore Badal does not believe so. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Badal does not believe him as part of the Armenian community, even though they both live in the Minor Asia region. However, for this, I will read the first little bit just to kind of reminisce. I haven't had a haircut in 40 days and 40 nights, and I was beginning to look a lot like several violinists out of work. You know the look. Genius, gone to pot, and ready to join the Communist Party. We barbarians from Asia Minor are hairy people. When we need a haircut, we need a haircut. It is so bad. I had outgrown my only hat. I am writing in a very serious story, perhaps one of the most serious I shall ever write. That is why I'm being flippant. What does flippant mean, you may ask? Any hints? Any use of context clues? The story around to understand this one word. Readers of Sherwood Anderson will begin to understand what I am saying after a while. They will know that my laughter is rather sad. I was a young man in need of a haircut, so I went down to 3rd Street, San Francisco, to the barber college for a 50-cent haircut. Now I wish to return back to the PowerPoint. And I would allow them to read till we had roughly 5 minutes, or enough to complete the wrap up. Now, at the end of the reading, I wish to ask you, what ethnicity was William Seyaran in 70,000 Assyrians? Now, what ethnicity was Theodore Badal in 70,000 Assyrians? You'll note that Armenian and Assyrian are both of the Asia Minor region. And he, in fact, called himself from that region. And that's how he described him. That's the community he saw himself in. But the difference between the two is that he believed himself Asia Minor, and Armenian was a part of that. while Theodore believed himself Assyrian and doesn't quite believe it's Asia Minor. Now, that's not saying that he believes that it's geographically not in the location. It's just that's not the community he identifies with. There's a discrepancy between the two where they misunderstand. Now, describe the two men in Mending Wall. How do they have a similar difference, or are they in the same community from the beginning? Do you believe maybe the protagonist of it, who enjoys and questions the Mending Wall, believes that he and the farmer on the other side are of the same community while the farmer does not? Is that why he believes they make good neighbors? You see how reading one enlightens another. While they both had communities, they think of a Venn diagram. You have a circle and then you have another circle. Now, both of our protagonists believe that both of the groups are in the circle, while our other character, I don't wish to say antagonist, is not. Now for the homework. I wish to assign the remainder of 70,000 Assyrians if you have not finished the reading. And I also wish for you to write a few complete sentences, that is a paragraph, about the setting, characterization, and conflict in 70,000 Assyrians. That'll be due tomorrow. You'll turn it in at the start of class. Now, any further questions before we wrap up for today's lesson? Thank you, and class adjourned.